Good morning and welcome to Flexmls 301. Today we are going to be covering the CMA and the different types of CMAs and then working on stats reports. So this class will be roughly 2.5 to 3 hours long depending on how many questions we have. Looks like we're gonna have a nice small class, so if you have any questions at any point, just type them into the chat panel and I have a couple monitors going and I will check the screen. So first thing we're going to do in this class is the CMA. And the reason I leave the CMA for my advanced class is because it's one of the hardest things to do in Flexmls. So what I'm going to do today is show you how I do a CMA. I may do it differently than what you're used to, but I find the way that I do is much more intuitive and it makes CMAs a lot easier. What I mean by that is, if everyone can pay attention to my screen, a lot of people will type in the word CMA and go to the actual CMAs here and then start a new one from the beginning. What I do instead is I do a CMA starting with the comparables. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a search looking for the comparables, and then we're going to take those comparables and bring them into the CMA. So I'll show you what I mean. So for the purposes of this class, what we have is we have a client who purchased a house in 2012. And the client wants to cash out. Market's high right now, and they're planning on moving. So they ask you to price their house. They want you to do a CMA to see how much this house is worth. So what we're going to do is we are going to search for our comparables in the quick search and then bring them into the CMA. So to do this, it's pretty simple. I'm going to go to status. Now I'm going to choose active, and I'm going to hold on command or control and select all of these. So I want to have as many as possible. But the key thing here is we see under contract date 366 days back, and then we see a date range. So this is an absolute date range and this is a relative date range. And if you remember from Flexmls 101, you hit these two black arrows, it'll toggle from an absolute to a relative. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this to 6 months back. And then for the sold date, 6 months back as well. Now, if it was really hot market, you might want to do 3 months. It really depends on how many comps you're going to be able to pull up. I'm just going to keep it simple with the 6 months back. And then I'm going to scroll down and do some other search parameters. Now, you will notice I'm not going to put in a price when I'm searching for comps because then I'm going to prejudice my results by assuming there is a certain price. So what we're going to do, and this is the reason that I search for comps first, is I like to make my comps as close as possible to the subject property. Let me see if I can zoom it a bit. There we go. Hopefully that looks like it won't zoom in anymore, but that should work. So what I like to do is I like to search for comps that are as close as possible to my subject property. Now, I know that's not always the case, and so when I do a CMA in this class, I purposely make it a pretty simple CMA, so you see how it works when things are great. Now, I know a lot of CMAs, it's more of an art than a science, and you're having to, search a wide variety of things. That's the CMA that, unfortunately, you need to do as well. But I want to make sure you understand the process first. Once you understand the process, then, if you do a CMA a couple of times, it makes it a lot easier. So we're going to keep it pretty simple for this example. So I'm going to put in a few more options. Now, you could do things like subtype. One second. Hold on. I'm going to start this. I'm not getting any behavior from my computer. Hold on. Okay, well, give me 1 second. I'm using a Macintosh instead, and I'm having issues. Okay, we'll try this one more time. I think it's not letting me to stay zoomed in. So we'll try one more time. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to select multiple options here. I'm going to go 6 months back. And then so bedrooms, I'm gonna do the exact number of bedrooms, 3 to 3, and baths 2 to 2. Like I said, I want to get my comps as close as possible to my subject property. And then we can put in a few more things. Now, I could do marketing city if I want to do the marketing city of Rocky Mount, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a subdivision. So I'm going to make sure my comps are in the same subdivision. You could use a radius search if you would like, and we covered that quite a bit in Flexmls 101 and 201. Just personal preference. I don't work there, so I don't know the area very well. So if I do a radius, it may end up encompassing multiple subdivisions that are very different from each other. So for the purposes of this class, I like to keep it in the same subdivision. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go to subdivision, and I'm going to put in the name of the subdivision, Willow Creek. And then we're going to put in square foot heated. Now, whenever I do square foot, I'm going to do 300 square feet below and 300 square feet above. And like I said before, I want to get my comps as close as possible to my subject property, which makes a lot of sense for things like bedrooms, bathrooms, subdivision. But for square footage, you're going to need a range. So what we're going to do is we take the number of the square footage of our subject property, go 300 feet below and 300 feet above. So then we get a nice range. And we're going to use adjustments in the CMA to bring the comps in line with the subject property. And I'll explain that more when we get to the comp section. But how do I find out what my actual square footage on my subject property is? It's pretty simple. I'm going to pull up my subject property up in the quick launch bar. So let me just type it in really quickly, 2006 Bridgewood. Now, it's only been listed once. That's fine. But if you're doing this was purchased in 2012, but if you're doing a CMA for something that was like 2005, is ideally you want the MLS number because it's going to help us when we are in the actual CMA. It makes it faster. So what I'm going to do is actually write down that number so I have it so I don't lose it. So this is our subject property, 950-91923. And I'm actually going to open this up in a new tab so I don't lose what I'm working on. Great thing about the quick launch bar. And here, this is where I'm going to get the information if I don't remember what my subject property has. This is where I get this stuff for the comp. So this is where I would see like the 3 bedrooms. I see the 2 baths. But what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for square footage right here, 1379. So I'm going to write that number down. And then I know 300 below is going to be 1079 and 300 above is 1679. Now, as you'll notice while I'm doing the CMAs, a lot of this comes down to personal preference. I'm going to show you how I do it inside of Flexmls, but I highly recommend you run CMAs by your broker or become best friends with an appraiser because, again, they're the ones that are maybe more professional at this. At my time as an MLS director, I know of a few people who got in trouble with their clients because they didn't take the time to do a quality CMA and their clients were very unhappy with them. And I've heard it does result in lawsuits. So you want to make sure you're very careful with CMAs. Take your time, don't just know how to do it inside of Flexmls, take classes. And I'm sure there's plenty of stuff online that's available to show you like the best methods to do it. Okay, so I have my square footage right here. And then I have my subdivision. So other things that I would normally look for is like year built, or really, subtype. So is it, single family? Is it mobile? I happen to know that these are all pretty similar, so I'm not going to put that in. But something like year built, if you're going to do a CMA and the property you have is 20 years older than everything, the rest of your comps, that's going to cause some issues. So you want to be aware of the year built. Split bedroom plan, master bedroom, what floor is it on, things like that, if it's important to you for your CMA. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible by literally what we're going to be doing is bedrooms, bathrooms, subdivision, and we're going to do square footage. But like I said before, year built, location type, you could do other things. So I'm going to do square footage heated. And like I said before, I want to keep this as simple as possible so you understand the process, because a lot of CMAs will not be this easy. So I'm purposely making it easy. You can see how it works. We'll go through it a couple times, and then when you play around with the CMA on your own, you should have better luck. Okay, so we now have 6 results. I'm happy with this. You know, I've talked to people say I always go for 2 active, 2 pending, 2 closed, or you know, they only choose 3. This again comes down to personal preference. I think, you know, more results are better because it should give you a better range for your price. And so I'm just going to go to the list tab and visually look at these listings. So I'm going to eyeball them. And the reason I do this before I actually go into the CMA is I look for anything that seems odd. So we have 3 closed, a couple of pending, and an active. And I notice already they're all pretty close in price. So that gives me a good sign. But a lot of times when I switch to this list tab, I'll see something that's, you know, way out of the range of the other properties. And if I were just to include that without actually going into the actual detail, I may miss that it's a foreclosure or that it needs a lot of work, you know, sold as is. You know, just adding it in isn't going to help me out because it may be very different from the actual other comps or what my subject property is. So just looking at these, I see these are all very similar. So probably the same developer, all close to the same price. So I'm going to keep all 6 of these. But again, if I look through and I saw any of these really shouldn't belong, I don't have to include it. And one reason for that might be is if I happen to know that the sold price to list price is really a big difference, so maybe 94 or 90%, including the active or the pending might skew my results. But if I know it's right, it's a hot market and things are very, very close, I may feel comfortable using the actives or the pendings. Again, this comes down to personal preference. I'm just going to show you how you can do it inside of Flexmls. But I have my 6 results. I'm just going to go to the list tab again, just to eyeball and make sure everything looks good to me. Another thing you might do is look for your days on market. If you suddenly notice your days on market for a listing is, you know, a couple hundred days, and like, well, why is that? And then you notice, oh, the price is also really high. That might be something that you purposely leave out because, again, there could be something wrong with the property, or, you know, maybe you talk to the realtor, there's, you know, there were smokers or heavy cat smell, that kind of thing. You're not going to see that necessarily from a listing report. Okay, so we now have 6 results. We have our 6 comparables. So now we're going to go into the CMAs. This is how I do CMAs differently. I search for my comps first, make sure my comps are as close as possible to my subject property. And I know that isn't always the case, but really the only difference is going to be the square footage. We do a range of 600, 300 below, and 300 above, and then we're going to make adjustments on the square footage. So I'm going to go up to CMA, and I'm going to click on Use All Results. Okay, so we see a full CMA, we see a quick CMA, and we see a statistical CMA. Now, there's 3 different CMAs, and they have 3 different reasons to use them. So I will go through each one of these. We will just happen to go through the full CMA first. Now, the full CMA includes a subject property. That is the key. You're doing a CMA basically meaning you have a client who wants to list a property, or maybe they want to buy a property. They want to see what they should pay for it. They ask you to do comparable analysis on that. But it has a subject property. That's the key thing. Now, a quick CMA just compares listings side by side. There is no subject property. So quick CMA is a great way to, what I use it for is a cover sheet. Let's say you're going to meet some clients on the weekend. You're going to go to 4 houses. Now, you can print out 4 pages of 4 listing report pages, which is great, but it's nice to use the CMA as a cover sheet because it puts the listing side by side with key information. So then they can see on the first page what has 3 bedrooms, what has 4 bedrooms. They don't have to flip through all the individual different reports, especially if you are going more than 4. You're doing something like 6 or 7, it is definitely important. And then the statistical CMA is basically for running crunchy numbers. If you want to see stats in a certain subdivision, that kind of thing. I had one of my realtors last year, and he was a new realtor, and he had this idea that he would volunteer for other realtors, like more experienced ones. He'd volunteer to work their open houses to get some experience. And so what he did is he asked me, well, how can I find out what houses or what areas are hot? So we would do a stats CMA on the different subdivisions and find out where most of the sales were. And so what he would do is he would purposely volunteer for the open houses in these subdivisions that were the hottest. And he'd go there, he'd get experience, but also he'd pick up potential clients because they would go in there and say, oh, I'm not really interested in this house. He said, well, great, let me get your information. Let me help you out. And so he got business as a new realtor by focusing on the open houses and the subdivisions that were the most sales. So that's something I will show you in the statistical CMA. Okay, so let's come back to the full CMA. Again, the purpose is we have a subject property. Our example here is our client purchased a house in 2012 and they want to sell it because they think the market's pretty hot right now. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the full CMA and we're going to click on next step. So on this page, I'm just going to put in some basic information. So we'll put in Luke Skywalker, and it gives you the option to use the today's date or the current date. So whenever, if they were to pull up the CMA in a week, it would say in a week. I personally just like the current date. You can either use your name or you could use a business card if you'd like. I'm just going to do the generic card and then put in some comments. So here is a CMA for you for your property on 2006 Ridgewood Drive. So whatever you want to type in here, you can. You might want to do a couple sentences, kind of explain a bit more about what the CMA is. I'm going to keep this simple. So then we're going to go to next step. Now, when we're on the subject tab, there's two things I want you to pay close attention to. Two things that you can do. One, auto-populate fields from existing listing. And this is why I told you to write down the MLS number when you pull up that subject property. And again, I click on that. I can write it from this screen, or I could always open it up into new tab, which is what I've done right here. Open it up into new tab. But ideally, you have an MLS number, even if it's like 10, 15 years old, because what it will do is it will auto-populate these fields. It'll auto-populate these fields with information from that listing. Now, there's a caveat here. If you're using older listings, what may happen is you're going to want to auto-populate and no information comes through for certain fields. That might be because you have a field now that is required. And so all the newer listings in the last year or two have data, but that listing from 10 years ago, there's no data. So it just won't auto-populate. But to do that, we're going to auto-populate fields from existing listing by clicking on this. And I'm going to put in that MLS number, 950-91923. So I'm click on submit. And so what I do with that is it now fills out these fields. And you'll notice some of them are missing. Again, that may be because there was just not data at that point. This listing is 8 years old. So the key thing here is auto-populate fields from existing listing. If you don't have an MLS number, again, what I always tell people, if you're not sure if there's an MLS number, just type the address and see if it's come up. And so we see there is an MLS number there. But if there is no MLS number, you're going to have to manually fill out this information. So it's great if you can find one, even if there's been changes. Like if you know now there happens to be 4 bedrooms, you can just change it to 4 bedrooms manually. It's not a problem. But the other thing that I like to do on the screen, first thing is the auto-populate, but the second thing is add more fields so I can have this on the CMA. So what I mean by that is I'm going to click on new item, and then I can add more fields. So things like days on market, you know, we have bedrooms, we have baths, maybe I want number of rooms. So just take your time going through this list and decide what you want. Now I'm going to add subdivision. This happens, they're all happen to be in the same subdivision, but I just want to have it on here anyways. So just again, go through this list, decide what is important to you. City limits. So take your time, go through, decide what is important to you. But before I continue, I want to save replace template. The reason I'm doing this is right here, it says none custom fields. You're provided with some default fields when you do a CMA, but once you've done anything in the system in Flexmls, as we've done in previous classes, you're going to probably want to customize it based on how you use the system. So let's say that all these 4 fields are really important to me for either this client or for me for the CMA. So I've added 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save replace template right here. And let's just call this Chewy's res template. And I'm going to make this a default one. So the next time I come through to do a CMA, it's already going to be there. So I'm going to click on save template. Now, one thing I have to do before I continue in just this one time, because I auto-populated before I added these fields, I just have to auto-populate one more time. But the next time I do a CMA, these fields will now be there. So I'm going to click on auto-populate and click on submit. So now we see, okay, some of that information has been filled out. But again, something like city limits, that may be a field that's only 4 or 5 years old. And so there's just no data there for this old listing. So you could always put it in if you happen to know that, yes, it is in within the city limits, HOA, you know, if you know this information, which likely you will know because you're listing the property. Okay, so we're going to click on next step. And this brings us to our comp screen. Now, I searched for my comparables first because I find it's easier to narrow down getting comps that are closer to my subject property. But you do have an option to add other comparables. So if I click on add comparables, you could do either a radius search from here. So this was basically skipping what I started with, and you could do it from the CMA. Personally, I don't like to do it that way. Pull an MLS number as a listing collection. The one time you might use this is for non-MLS comparables, meaning you can create a new comparable, which you're going to have to enter in everything manually step by step. And so go to the different sections. So we're going to see the same fields that we had on the subject tab, and we would put in this information. Now, it's personal preference to use non-MLS comparables. I know a lot of appraisers will not use non-MLS comparables because they will say, well, that subject or that property was not on the open market, so it's not a fair thing to use in your CMA because you don't know what the actual price is, because again, it's not on the open market. But you know, I don't know how things are done in your area. I teach all over the US, so I just know from talking to a lot of appraisers, they don't like non-MLS comparables. But you may not have that choice. You may not have really any good comparables, and so you do have to add some non-MLS comparables. So that's what you would do. You would go to your comps tab, go to add comparables, and then there is that option right here for the non-MLS comparables. So don't worry, after we go through the CMA, we're going to go through it one more time to make sure we understand what we're doing. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to adjustments. Now, usually when I'm on this section, especially when I'm teaching in person, I tell people just to skip over this, because if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And this is something that I saw with my realtors when I was an MLS director last year. They would do CMAs that were just atrocious because they didn't know what they were doing. They were adjusting for absolutely everything. And so they'd have prices that were $100,000 off from what it actually should be. So I normally tell people, avoid this section unless you know what you're doing. The only time I ever really do comps with adjustments is when we're going to do square footage. And so, okay, how do we do square footage? Well, I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go to square foot heat. And so our subject property has 1,379 square feet. And so the adjustment that we're going to do is this comp has 1521. So what you're going to assume is that the reason this house is more than our subject property is because it has more square footage. So by making an adjustment, we're going to assume that 2038 Bridgewood Road has the exact same amount of square footage as their subject property, which in turn will drop its price. And then if we go to the list, we see that there is one for 1352. So 2034 Bridgewood Road, that has less square footage than our subject property. So we're assuming the price is less because it has less square footage. So what we're gonna do is we'll adjusting it to making it looks like it has the same square footage, which will raise the price up. So the reason I like to make sure it has the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms and then just adjust on square footage is you're kind of assuming that the houses are very similar, but the only difference is that some of the rooms might be slightly larger, which shows the discrepancy in square footage. If you were to, keep the comps as close as possible, that's a pretty good idea. But if you have things that are way off, bedrooms, bathrooms, that kind of thing, then your square footage, it's harder for me anyways to do comps at square footage. I like to keep it as simple as possible for the purposes of this class. We keep everything almost exact if we can, and then the square footage is the only thing that we're going to adjust on. So to get an idea of what our listings go, what's with this price per square foot in a certain area, I'm actually going to use my quick launch. Let's see if this is set up. Okay, so I'm going to type in sub of Willow Creek, and we'll do residential, and I'm going to open this up into new tabs so I don't lose the work that I'm doing. And what I can do is it's pretty simple. Oh, let's try that one more time. We'll do it this way. Okay, so we're going to do Willow Creek. And I'm going to do closed within the last 6 months. And then I'm going to go to the compare tab. And we'll talk about the compare tab a little bit later on in class. But what I'm going to do is there's something called search statistics. And it will actually give me a sold price per square foot. So then, and I always use the median. I never use the average. Now the average and the median have to be very close, but a lot of times your average can be way off. So I'm gonna use $114. And one thing I do notice is our sold to list ratio is 100%. Remember earlier I said sometimes you may not feel comfortable including those active or pendings because there might be a huge discrepancy in the list price versus the sold price, 92, 93%. Well, what I'm seeing right here is 100% for my median, so it makes me feel more comfortable using those actives and the pending. And again, with how hot the market is right now, like I'm okay with that. But back in 2013, 2014, when the market was not hot, yeah, you may want to be careful with those kinds of things. But I'm going to take this number 114. Now, what I'm going to do with that number is I'm actually going to divide that number into thirds. So I'm going to take 1/3 of 114. Now, this is one of those things where CMAs are an art, not a science. I've spoken to a lot of appraisers, and a lot of them don't like to use the full value. Now, this is only 114, so it's not going to be a huge difference. But when you are dealing with properties that have square footage price per square foot, $200, $300, and then you use the entire value, what that ends up doing is, again, we're using a range of 300 feet below and 300 feet and above. And if you're working in a subdivision that's pretty nice and you have those high values for price per square foot, you may end up having a difference of $50,000 to $100,000 in prices for your comps. And this is where I say we search for our comps first. Our bedrooms are the exact same. Bathrooms are the exact same. We might have a year built range within a couple of years. So we might have houses that are very, very similar. The only difference is that one house has rooms that are slightly larger. And does that really equate to $100,000 difference in price? I would say not. So one thing I've discussed with appraisers when I teach CMAs is a lot of them like the 1/3 of the value because they kind of look at it as a law of diminishing returns. If you use that full value, then it really does give you a broad range, and that's not what you want for pricing a house. Again, this comes down to personal preference. When you do a CMA, I highly recommend running it by your broker, see how they do things. This is just how I do it inside the system. So I'm going to take 1/3 that value. So let's just do 114 divided by 3. And I'm going to use my phone because it is like 7 o'clock for me. I'm in Mountain Time currently. So that's going to be $38. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to edit adjustment list right here. And we're going to add a new adjustment. So we'll do residential. I'll do the square foot heated. And then I'm going to put in that 38. So what that does is we're going to save this. And then so we have it right there, and I'm returning CMA. So what this does is, like I said before, our subject property has 1,379 square feet. This on 238 Bridgewood, 2038 Bridgewood, has more square footage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the square footage of the comp down to the same level as my subject property, which should drop the price $38 for each square foot. Now this one on 2038 Bridgewood Road has less square footage. So it has about 20, looks like 27 square feet less than my subject property. It's going to add 27 square feet to that comp, which will raise the price for so $38 per square footage. So that is the purpose of adjustments. Now people will do adjustments for bedrooms and bathrooms and other things. I just avoid that unless you absolutely know what you're doing, because that's how you can get in trouble. People just adjust for everything, and then they end up doing a CMA. I'll run the CMA through RPR, through Realtor Pro Search, and then see that they're, there's a couple other pricing tools, and see that they're actually $100,000 off. And this is something that they might give to a client, which is not necessarily a good thing. So we're going to continue on for the next step. Actually, as long as we're talking about that, let's go to Realtor.com Pro Search. This is something that is going to be right here is under your products, but this is something that your North Carolina Regional provides, and it does do some basic pricing. Now, this may not be exactly what you want, but I do like the idea of doing MLS Pro Search and then do an RPR for a price as well. So the RPR AVM to give you, because you might end up having, CMAs from 2 or 3 different products to kind of get yourself an idea like the average. So let's just put in 2006. Ridgewood, there we go, Rocky Mount. And so it happens, the estimate for this is 150,000. Now, I don't know what it's using for comps, but you can do custom reports, that kind of thing. So clearly there's a season increase since 2012. So if you do like the idea of using other products like Realtor.com Professional Search or the RPR, I do recommend using it, just so, especially if you want to see where your comps line up versus, like, say, what the other sites do. So I'm gonna write down that value, 150,000. I have a feeling this one is gonna actually be worth more than that based on this CMA, but you may want to run it through RPR as well. I currently don't have an RPR account, so I can't actually tell you what the RPR value would be. Okay, just give me 1 second. Just close down some tabs. Okay, so now we're on the summary screen. Now we're basically done with the CMA. We just have a few other things we want to point out. So we see our breakdown of closed listings, we see pending listings, and then we see active. Like I said before, I'm keeping the active in here, even though it seems a little bit higher, because I saw that the sold price for list price is basically 100%. So this, this one right here is pending at 178. It's probably going to get what it's asking, especially when we look at those days on market. Days on market are so low, it might even be a bidding war to where it goes higher. And I know that's something that's becoming much more common now. I talked to someone in Poconos, and she says they're getting bidding wars from people from New York City, sight unseen on properties. So that's causing a lot of issues, because people are now moving in these properties, and it's not what they expected, but they never actually showed up to look at the property because they want to get out of New York City. Okay, so then we see our low, average, median, highs. Again, I'm a big fan of the median price, so we see 168,000. Oh, I realized I forgot something. When we're on adjustment screen, I actually need to auto adjust comparables first. This is why I go through this twice. So we're going to auto adjust. We put in the $38. Click on OK. 6 adjustments were made. I'm going to go to my square foot heated. And so now here, this is where I see the difference in the price. So we see this one's dropped by like $5,000. This one's dropped by $5,000. This one's about $5,000. Now, if I did the full value, it could be like $15,000. If you're okay with that, you again, do the same how you'd like to do it. But a lot of what I've talked to with appraisers is they're not a big fan of using the full value when adjusting. Again, because everything else is basically the same, but you have a house that's just slightly larger and you're adding $50,000 value to it, that may really skew your results. Okay, so we're gonna click on next step again. And so now we see the adjustments for our CMAs. See a breakdown, and then we see a breakdown. So average sale to list price, so 0.99, basically what I was saying before. We see the average list square foot heat is 114, so that's what the number we plugged in. Days on market. And so that's our basic summary, which is this is going to show on our CMA. I'm going to click on next step. And now on this screen, it's going to give us a low, high, and a recommended. Now these low and high, these are just the actual, that's the lowest comp and the highest comp. So it says right here, calculate high-low using high-low price comparables. And then the recommended is going to be like in the center. Now the calculate low, high using a percentage, you may personal preference, you want to do say like 2.5% recalculate. And so we go 158, 166, and then do 162. Again, so we see 162. And then we see, it's whatever range that you want to do. I like to do the 2.5 just because it's closer band. But we're basically going to recommend this listing at 162,000. And remember the number we'd written down for Realtor Pro, Realtor.com Pro search was 150. RPR might be close to that. You might want to check Zillow as well. But things with like Zillow is, your clients may be upset over it, but you have access to the primary source of data, which is Flexmls. So I would rely more on what you're using than other sites. But it is nice to kind of verify, see if you're in the range by looking at Realtor Pro, Realtor.com Pro search, Zillow, RPR, or any other pricing tools that you have. So we're going to click on next step. Okay, so on this screen, it shows you all the things that you can see on a CMA. And the problem with this is it ends up adding a lot of stuff that you may not be interested in. So what I usually do is I remove a couple things like statistical summary, search parameters. Select cover page, individual adjustment summary for each listing. I don't need that. Price per calculation, each listing, I don't need that. Now you do have the option for which report. Do you want to do the full report, which has all the information from the listing, but it's the public version, so it doesn't have the other realtor's name, commission rates, or whatever fields, like maybe lockbox information that are private. So I'm gonna keep the full. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on view. So give us a second to load. So this is what my CMA is gonna look like. We have the subject property photo. We have my business card and my photo. Here's the information. And then we see a map of the subject property and the comparable properties. See how far it is from the subject property. Just the fact that these are so close gives me, faith that this should be a good CMA. We see our subject property information. And then when we get down to our comps, what we're going to see is we're going to see our subject property, and then we're going to see our comps three. So subject property first, then our comps three side by side. So this does this twice. And then again, subject property and our three comps. So we see, the days on market, and then any adjustments. But we also see, remember we added some new fields like number of rooms, subdivision, city limits. This all is going to be the same because they're all on the same street. But if you're doing, a CMA with stuff that's spread out across multiple subdivisions or even maybe multiple cities, you just, you're doing a rural property and you're not finding any good comps. So you really just have to kind of spread out. It's important to add these other fields that you might find helpful for your clients. And then if we keep going down, we see the detail report for all the comps. So it's our first comp, and it looks just like what we'd see inside of Flexmls, but again, they just see your information. They don't see commission rates. They don't see any other private fields. Second comp, so it's gonna have all 6 comps. So usually what I do is when I'm doing a CMA is I'll first view it, which I did. Let me just close this. I click on view, and then a lot of times I will download a PDF version. So a lot of times it looks nicer. And this is something you could print or you could email to your client. But I always do like to save any CMA that I do, just in case I need to pull it up again. I'll just say Luke Skywalker, and then I'm just going to give it the address 2006 006 Bridgewood. Click on save. Okay, so there's my save CMA, and you'll notice that it actually saved drafts. So every time I made a change on that CMA, it saved a draft. So that's a really cool thing. And that's what I pull up when I type in CMAs. I don't start CMAs here, but if I ever want to see the CMAs that I'm working on, it's going to be here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the same process again and make sure your notes are correct and make sure you understand the process. And if you don't, ask questions. So what we're doing is we're searching for our comps first. So I'm going to do a quick search. And our example here is we have a client purchased a house in 2012. They want to put it on the market now. They want to cash out. Maybe they're moving away from the area, but they want to see what they should list their price at, their house as. So we're going to go to status. I'm going to hold on control, or if I have a Mac command, select everything because I want to include all of these. And we're going to go back 6 months. Now, again, if it's a super hot market, you might want to do 3 months. If you know you're going to get a lot of comps, I'm just going to keep it at 6 months because the market just really started getting hot about 6 months ago with Corona, or maybe even less than that. But if it's been hot for a long time, again, you might want to use that range of just 3 months. And then, I put in fields, I could do like subtype. If I happen to know that in this certain street, I'm gonna get condos and manufactured home and I want single family, you might just decide to do single family. But I'm gonna do my bedrooms and my baths the exact same as my subject property. And I'm gonna do my subdivision. Now, I explained before, you could zoom in and use the circle. So I could zoom into Rocky Mount. If I know exactly where my subject property is, click on the circle, find it, and go out, say, a mile if I want. If you want to do it that way. Personally, what I'm going to do, though, is I'm just going to use the subdivision because I know the subdivision and the houses are very, very similar. Like I said before, I'm keeping the CMA as easy as possible to understand. So when you see the process, when you do a CMA on your own, I find it's easier. So we're going to do subdivision of Willow Creek. But again, you can do a radius if you want. And then we're going to do the square foot heated. Now, like I said before, I like to pull up my subject property to make sure I have the information I need. And I'm going to pull this up into a new tab. And the key things that I was looking for was like bedrooms, bathrooms, square foot heated, like the subdivision, maybe anything else that I want to do, year built, split floor plan, whatever you find is important for your comps. So I'm gonna write down that number, 1379. So that tells me I need to go 300 feet below and 300 feet above. So that's what I'm gonna do. So square foot heated, we're gonna do 1079 and 1679. So that gives me 6 results, the same 6 results we had before. I'm going to go to the list tab. Now, before I go into the actual CMA, I like to visually verify my comps. And the reason I do that on the list tab or in the detail tab is first I go to the list tab and see, okay, are any of these priced way different from the others? And if I notice something that's 130,000 or something that says 200,000 and I'm like, that seems really high or really low, what I'll do is I'll go in the detail tab and I'll, scroll through the detail tab and say, okay, is there a reason why? And I might see that it's really low because it's foreclosure and it needs a lot of work, or it's really high because they've completely renovated it and it's got a mini golf course in the back or something. I might say, okay, well, that's not something my subject property has, so I'm gonna not want to include that comp. So again, I'm checking the list tab to see anything jump out at me, everything looks fine. And then so now I'm ready to go into my actual comparables. So I'm going to click on CMA and we'll use all results. So now we're going to start the CMA. So remember, the full CMA has a subject property. We have our subject property. We're going to click on next step. Okay, so let's just do this one more time. Luke Skywalker. I'll include the like a business card. And some basic information here is a CMA for you. Next step. Now our subject tab, the two things that I talked about that are important. One, auto-populate if you have an MLS number. You put in the address and see if it's been listed. You do have an MLS number. So that MLS number, you're going to type in here when you get that pop-up. 950-91923. Click on submit. Now you'll notice those fields that I added in the last time we did the CMA, they are now there because I saved a template as my default. So that stuff's already there. But I could always add another item if I would like. So maybe some like high school happens to be that information. Now, like I did before, if I add a new field after I've auto-populated, I just have to auto-populate again real quickly. And there we go. Click on next step. So we search for our comps first, which is what I like to do. So the only thing I point out on this screen is if you do need to add a comparable, usually it's going to be a non-MLS comparable, but that's going to be personal preference if you want to add that. Click on next step for adjustments. On this screen, I tell people skip over this and let you know, unless you know what you're doing. But the one that is pretty easy to understand is the square footage adjustment. And we went to edit adjustment list. We clicked on add new and added that adjustment. Now, so I found the value by taking 1/3 the price of sold price per square footage. And I did that by pulling up the subdivision of Willow Creek, looking for the closed listings in the last 6 months, and then seeing, okay, what is the median sold price per square foot in this area. So we got the value of 114. I took 1/3 the value. I put it in the adjustment list. Okay, Kay's asking, can you show again where you pulled up that and with the price? Okay, so what I did is, you can even do this just like a quick search. I'm gonna right click quick search. Let me just close on this tab. Come on. Okay, try that one more time. Okay, we'll try it this way. Okay, so it's just doing active. That's why it's only pulling up one. Just give me 1 second. Close down this tab. Okay, so what I just did is I went to closed listings in the subdivision of Willow Creek. We went back 6 months. And then what I did is I went to the compare tab. And on the compare tab, you have something called search statistics. And on the search statistics screen, you have a sold price per square foot. And so I took that median value of 114 and then I divided it by 3. So again, just do a search for your subdivision, or if you were to do a radius search, do the same radius and then get a price for that. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna auto adjust comparables because we already have something in the edit adjustment list right here. So when we auto adjust, it gives us a pop-up that says auto adjust your comparables. We'll add adjustments based on your rules and differences between your subject, property, and comparable, yada, yada, yada. Click on OK. And we know it worked because when we go to our square foot heated right here, we see the values have now changed and then adjust up or down. And so most of our properties have more square footage than our subjects, so it's brought the price down. Then we're going to click on next step. And here's the basic price analysis. We already talked about that. The next step, on a recommendation. Now, I said before, you can use the high-low from the comps, or you can change it to 2.5% or 5% or 3%, whatever you want to do. We're going to recalculate. So this kind of shows the range, but this is the recommended price, 162,000. And if you remember when we pulled it up in realtor.com pro search, it said 150. So relatively close, but you may want to check RPR and like other sites to make sure you are close. Next step, then we are on the finished screen. So what I always do here is I remove the things that I feel just aren't necessary. And then I view it first, make sure it looks good, then I will download it as a PDF. And then it's created a PDF, and I'll pull this over to the screen. Okay, it's showing up on my other screen, but I can't get it on my second. Okay, anyways, it does generate a PDF for you. Okay, so that is how you do a full CMA. We are gonna start up again in 10 minutes. So at would be 10:03 your time. So please get some coffee, pet your animals, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. Now in the second hour, what we're going to focus on to start is doing other CMAs. We're going to focus on the quick CMA and the statistical CMA. So let me just go back to do a quick search. So I said before that you have three types of CMA, the full CMA, the quick, and the statistical CMA. Now the full CMA is going to have a subject property, which we did for the last hour. We had a client wants to list a property, they want to know what it's worth. And just while we're doing that, why don't we actually see? So we got 162 was our recommended price. What was our sold price when they purchased it? For 80,000. So basically doubling the value of the house. So that is gonna, have a happy client. I always like to check to see where I'm at. So the next thing we're gonna do though is we're gonna do a quick CMA. Now the quick CMA compares listings against themselves. So you don't have a subject property. So the example I like to use is open houses. So I'm going to do open house in the next 7 days. Okay. And then let's just do a price of say 200 to 250,000. Okay, let's try to go up to 300,000. There we go. So we have 9. So let me go to the list tab. And actually 250 to 300 would be good. So what I'm doing in the purposes of this demonstration is, let's imagine we have a client, says this, okay, we got, this is how much money we have. We have no idea what we want, and they want us, go spread out all over through Eastern North Carolina. And so what you want to do is you're going to print out some listing reports for these open houses, but you want to have a cover sheet so they can see what it all entails. What I mean by that is, if we were to go to a detail report for each of these properties, there's so much information. If you print off, 6, 7, 8 listing reports, all this information is a lot to take in. So if we go up to CMA, and then we're going to use the results. Now I have 8, that's quite a bit, but you could always have like 4 or 5. We're going to use the results. And this time I'm going to do a quick CMA. And so the quick CMA is useful when comparing a set of listings without a subject property. This option creates a side-by-side comparison, a price analysis summary, and other statistics. So we're just going to do a quick CMA, click on next step. Now on this screen, I just do a couple things real fast. Cover page. I want to make sure they know it's me that's providing this information for them. And then I don't need side-by-side comparisons of status because they're all active. And I don't need a statistical summary. I'm trying to keep this as basic as possible. And then it says include listing detail using this report. I like to include the reports for all the listings after what is basically a cover sheet. And so I'm going to close. So this is what I mean. I click on view. What we have is it's branded to you. And then, so we have no subject property here. We just have our comps side by side. And what's great about this is, now it's quite a bit, so we might actually have like 4 or 5, but it has all the data that's basic that is kind of necessary. And remember the number of rooms, subdivision, city limits. I made that Chewy's res template as in my default. So something like this, a quick CMA, it's going to default to that. So it has that information. So like we see the subdivisions are different, city limits, you know, a lot of great information. So basically what you have is, if you were to do this for say 4 or 5 properties, this is really is a cover page. You know, they're going to the 3rd or the 4th property. They could flip back to the report that has all this information, but they don't remember where the bedrooms and bathrooms is. But if they go to the cover sheet, it's all right in front. So it's a really cool thing. So we're going to do this one more time. Back to search results. This time I'm just going to select it so we only have, say, like 4. Keep it simple. We're going to go up to CMA again. So again, our client has, you know, they know how much money. Okay, so how do you pull up open houses? Real simple. We're going to do a search. And down at the bottom, it says open house date right here. Down at the bottom, open house date. I'm going to click on open house date. And I'm going to put in, say, the next 7 days. And then I'm going to put a price range just to narrow it down. So let's do 250,000, well, not bedrooms, price. 250,000 to, we'll do 275 this time. Okay, so now we get 5 results. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have some results, I'm going to go up to CMA, use all results,